Giannis Antetokounmpo is a freak. From his wingspan to his motor to his infectious personality.
So guys, the freak.
Stop! What is wrong with you?
He could be a freak on the court and on the shit, you know what I'm saying?
Giannis has had fans mesmerized from the moment he entered the spotlight. So with all that said, how is it possible that nearly half the league passed on him on NBA draft night? How could so many NBA coaches and GMs overlook an athletic specimen of his caliber? And what made one scout confident enough to stake his entire reputation on him? To answer those questions, we have to go back to Greece in the mid-1990s. After years of struggling in their native Nigeria, Giannis's parents immigrated the family to Athens, Greece. But unfortunately, the move didn't help them prosper. You see, without Greek citizenships, Giannis's parents were unable to find steady work. And because of this, Giannis and his brothers were forced to work on the streets as children, selling anything they could find from watches to DVDs. And according to Giannis, he was an extremely good salesman as a young boy. His best advice being to never take no for an answer. And it's that determination that would eventually bring Giannis and his family to prosperity. But they weren't quite there just yet. As the story goes, one day 13-year-old Giannis and his brothers were playing tag in the streets of Athens when suddenly they were spotted by a local basketball coach. According to the coach, the moment he saw Giannis's long limbs, he felt like he was being spoken directly to by God. So he took God's advice and invited his brothers to join his semi-pro club in exchange for an agreement to help the family out financially. How could Giannis possibly say no? From then on, Giannis and his brothers started learning the sport of basketball, all the while still working long hours, hawking various goods on the streets, and often eating just one meal a day. In spite of all these hardships, Giannis was somehow able to show enough promise on the court to get offered a 4-year deal to play with a Division I FIBA club based in Madrid. A life-changing opportunity for both Giannis and his family. But little did they know, an even bigger opportunity was waiting just around the corner. One day, Giannis's older brother, Thanasis, met a pair of agents while he was out working on the streets. And somehow, Thanasis was able to convince these two gentlemen to come watch Giannis play in an open gym. Inspired by Giannis's play, one of the agents took a video of him and sent it off to a man in the United States named Yaron Arbel, a scout for the Charlotte Hornets. According to Arbel, he still remembers receiving a message to this day, that grainy video of Giannis ripping down rebounds and slamming home dunks. Mesmerized by his potential, he quickly forwarded the video of Giannis to assistant GM Tim Connolly. And from that point forward, Giannis was officially an NBA prospect. Now, the only question was which team was going to be brave enough to take a chance on him. You see, going into the 2013 draft, Giannis was a pretty risky prospect. First and foremost, he was super skinny. Second, he couldn't shoot. And third, he had just started playing basketball a couple years ago, so his feel for the game was going to take a while. Because of these factors, most draft boards had Giannis being picked just outside the lottery, which inevitably wound up being 100% accurate. But before we get into Giannis, we have to run through the guys who were picked before him. A smattering of players whose career ranged from a multi-time All-Star to possibly the greatest bust in the history of the draft. Which brings us finally to the number 1 pick.
Anthony Bennett of Toronto, Canada.
Anthony Bennett is quite possibly the most disappointing number 1 pick of all time. After being drafted first overall, Bennett only wound up playing in the league for 4 seasons. And unlike other busts, it wasn't injuries that derailed his career. But instead, it was his own work ethic, or lack thereof. Questions about Bennett's conditioning started right away for the Cavs as he showed up to training camp, 15 pounds overweight. From there, he went on to miss the first 16 field goal attempts of his career. Right from the onset, it was clear that this dude had no business playing on an NBA court. So, just a year after drafting him, Bennett was traded to the Minnesota Timberwolves in a package that helped the Cavs acquire Kevin Love. This was the first in a series of trades that would end in Bennett being out of the league entirely. It was an unprecedented fall for a first overall pick. Now, with all that being said, it's pretty hard to imagine the Cavs drafting Giannis with this pick. You see, even though Giannis and Bennett were pretty raw as prospects, Anthony Bennett was the safer choice by far, considering he had just played with a high efficiency at UNLV. against much stiffer competition than Giannis had faced in his short time playing overseas. And now that that's clear, let's talk about the second overall pick in this draft, a player that's probably the best out of this lottery.
Victor Oladipo of Indiana University.
Coming out of college, Victor Oladipo was seen as a strong defensive prospect, whose offense may take some time to develop. But in spite of this scouting report, Oladipo came out guns blazing in Summer League, averaging over 19 points per game and shooting over 50% from three. Soon enough, that Summer League success was translating to NBA action. In no time at all, Victor was able to carve out a space in the starting lineup for himself, averaging over 13 points a game, and making enough of an impact to end his season second overall in Rookie of the Year voting. In spite of all this success, Victor's time in Orlando wound up being pretty short-lived, ending in him being traded to OKC just after his third season. So what happened? Well, the problem was a logjam at the guard position, and with the Magic preferring to align themselves with Elfrid Payton, it was smarter for them to make a move while Victor's value was at an all-time high. This was a mistake the Magic would regret for years to come. And unfortunately, the trade didn't work out well for Victor either, with OKC funneling almost all their offense through Russell Westbrook at the time. Victor was forced to stand in the corner most of his tenure in Oklahoma, leading the Thunder to package him with Domantas Sabonis to Indiana for Paul George, finally giving Victor the space he needed to really spread his wings. The following year, Victor's game grew exponentially.
So to beat finds Oladipo for three.
Vic went being from an afterthought in OKC to winning the Most Improved Player award, along with 2 straight All-Star bids. By all accounts, at this time it looked like Victor was bound for an epic NBA career. Victor left a game against the Raptors only to discover that he had ruptured his right quad tendon. As a result, he had to get season-ending injury, which held him out for over a year. And from there, Victor Oladipo's story only got stranger. After his return, stories started to leak that Victor wasn't sure he wanted to re-sign with the Pacers. According to The Athletic, people in his orbit convinced Victor that he needed to find his way to a bigger market, and he should only stay with the Pacers if they signed him to a max contract. But unfortunately, that was too steep of a price for the Pacers, given Victor's recent injury history. So they shocked the league and traded Victor to the Houston Rockets, a team he only wound up playing 20 games for because they weren't interested in paying him either. And after that, Victor's injury troubles only got worse. After signing a 3-year deal with the Heat, Victor was unable to play more than 40 games again, ending what little chance he had at making a comeback. But at least, if only for a short period of time, he had a chance at true stardom, unlike these next slew of draft picks. With the 3rd overall pick in the 2013 draft, the Wizards select Otto Porter.
Otto Porter Jr. of Georgetown University,
who certainly had an impactful career, including a 2022 NBA championship run. But aside from looking just like Wilt Chamberlain's son, he was never more than just an effective role player. So eventually the Wizards dumped him to Chicago just to get off his contract. With the 4th overall pick in the 2013 draft, the Bobcats selected Cody Zeller.
Cody Zeller from Indiana University.
Another role player and another below average pick.
Zeller tries to stick with it. Johnson gets a piece. Zeller.
Though what more can you expect from a team that had just gone 7-59 2 years prior? You know, they don't call MJ the GOAT GM after all. And with the 5th and 6th pick in the 2013 draft, we got more of the same. 2 more centers, 2 more blasé careers. Alex Len bounced around the league, offering some solid backups for big minutes. And Nerlens Noel wound up doing mostly the same. With hindsight, it's pretty hard to justify picking these 2 big men over Giannis. But what we have to remember is each of these guys had way more basketball experience than Giannis did by a wide margin. And some teams weren't interested in taking big men, no matter how much potential they had. Which brings us to the next portion of the draft, featuring a string of guards whose career varied from a multi-time champion to the Rookie of the Year. But first, a guy who achieved none of those things.
Ben McLemore from the University of Kansas.
Coming out of college, Ben McLemore looked like a player with all the tools to be a star, but struggled to play well consistently. Some nights, he'd score 30 points, and others, he would just look clueless. Because of this, McLemore found himself in a vicious cycle of being signed and waived by various teams. Until 2021, he was accused of sexual assault, and that pretty much ended his career. Yikes. Next up, we have a guy with a much more positive story in Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. After being drafted by the Pistons, KCP earned a reputation as a bulldog defender. This led head coach Stan Van Gundy to give KCP more minutes than any rookie in his draft class. But despite his early success, the Pistons moved on from KCP just a few years later, leading KCP to sign a deal with the Los Angeles Lakers, which wound up being the perfect place for him to prove himself as one of the league's most reliable 3 and D players. A role he played perfectly as he helped the Lakers win the infamous Orlando Bubble Championship. And just 2 years later, he did it all again, playing alongside Jokic and the Denver Nuggets as they won their first championship in franchise history. Now, KCP is in Orlando, hoping he can help the Magic win their first title as well. Trey Burke, on the other hand, who was the 9th pick in the 2013 NBA draft, never really found his role in the league. After a stellar college career that ended with him winning the Naismith Player of the Year award, Burke was drafted by the Utah Jazz, where he initially showed a lot of promise, ending his first season 3rd overall in Rookie of the Year voting. But to Utah fans' dismay, this early success wound up being mostly just a flash in the pan, leading to a dip in Burke's stats during his 3rd NBA season. The problem was Burke's size was making it hard for him to score against NBA defenders. And with the sudden rise of Gordon Hayward, Burke found himself just out of the starting lineup. Next thing he knew, he was bouncing around the league searching for a long-term deal, which unfortunately he wouldn't end up ever finding.
A young player, you go through that in the NBA. I understand that.
CJ McCollum, on the other hand, had almost the exact opposite career. After being drafted by the Portland Trailblazers with the 10th pick,
C.J. McCollum from Lehigh University.
CJ struggled to find his way in the league for the first 2 seasons. But then, in a year after the departure of star players LaMarcus Aldridge and Nick Batum, McCollum was elevated to the team's starting 2-guard, a role he would hold in Portland for the next 6 years. And with over twice as many minutes as he played in the first 2 seasons, CJ flourished into a borderline all-star guard, upping his scoring average to over 20 points a game, allowing CJ to take home the Most Improved Player award, just a year before Giannis would take home the award himself. But before we get back to Giannis, we need to talk about a player from this draft who would go on to win the coveted Rookie of the Year award trophy.
Michael Carter-Williams from Syracuse University.
After Philly took Michael Carter-Williams with the 11th pick, people lauded the team for drafting a player with a relatively low ceiling, who was already over 21 years old. Regardless, MCW came in the league looking like the most polished player in his entire class, opening his rookie campaign with a shocking win over the newly formed Miami Heat Heatles, a game in which MCW nearly posted an unheard of quadruple double. This game alone sent Michael Carter-Williams on a course that would lead him to running away with the Rookie of the Year vote. But sadly, his early success would prove to be the highlight of his career. Midway through his sophomore year, Carter-Williams was traded to the Milwaukee Bucks in an effort by the Sixers to purposely tank their regular season. The way GM Sam Hinkie saw it, Carter-Williams was too good to play for a team that was hell-bent on losing. And in the end, Hinkie's foresight would be rewarded as moving off of MCW helped get the team in a position to draft Joel Embiid, the Sixers' first true all-star player since Allen Iverson. And as for MCW, he never averaged more points, assists, or minutes than he did in that rookie year, leading him to bounce around the league before inevitably falling out of the NBA entirely. A shocking fall from grace from the former Rookie of the Year, which finally rounds up the string of guards taking in the lottery before Giannis. An interesting group of picks that I think deserves more forgiveness, due to the fact that these teams needed guards more than bigs. But now that we've reached the last 3 players taken before Giannis, these picks are much harder to justify. Steven Adams has been one of the most beloved role players in the league ever since he landed with OKC with the 12th pick. He's funny, formidable,
early in the game, you really control the boards. Is that something that just comes naturally?
Yeah, I'm a big bastard, mate. You assume so, eh? Yeah, don't expect one of these little dudes to control the board.
and has a spectacular head of hair. But I'm not sure those things really justify taking him over Giannis, especially considered the Thunder were rumored to be in on Giannis after watching his Euro play. In the end, the Thunder went with Adams because he seemed more ready to play in the NBA, which was particularly important for them given the team had just finished their last season with 60 wins. Despite this sound logic and Steven Adams being great for OKC, it's still sad considering what we could have seen was the Greek Freak pairing up with the talents of Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook, a pair of players he'd soon be competing against to win MVPs. Yet somehow the next pick wound up being even more baffling. After trading Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce to the Nets on draft night, all signs pointed to the Celtics entering a rebuild. This meant Boston was the perfect place to take on raw prospects and give them time to develop. But for some reason, Danny Ainge decided to take this guy over Giannis Antetokounmpo.
Kelly Olynyk from Kamloops, Canada, and Gonzaga University.
How does that make any sense? Well, according to Danny himself, the Celtics worried that Giannis was too skinny to develop into a worthwhile prospect. Additionally, the team was dissuaded by Giannis' inability to stretch the floor. But if you ask me, the real truth is that the Celtics, like all these other teams who drafted players before him, were afraid to take a risk on Giannis due to his limited experience. And finally, we've reached the last pick before Giannis, a player whose career trajectory couldn't have gone worse.
The Utah Jazz select Shabazz Muhammad.
After being named the best high school player in his class, Shabazz Muhammad went to UCLA and led the Bruins to a Pac-12 regular season title. This should have made Muhammad one of the top picks in the 2013 draft, but due to a terrible NCAA tournament outing and rumors that he had a terrible work ethic, Muhammad dropped to the Timberwolves at 14. And once in the NBA, those rumors about his work ethic proved to be true. During the 4-day rookie symposium, Muhammad was sent home for bringing a girl to his hotel room just hours after being told no guests were allowed. Furthermore, Muhammad struggled to endear himself with the Timberwolves head coach Tom Thibodeau due to his lack of defensive effort, a trait that Thibodeau's teams were known for. Because of this, Muhammad was moved out of Minnesota before the 2018 trade deadline, leading his release in March the following year. After that, Muhammad struggled to find minutes in the NBA, playing just 11 games for the Bucks before eventually falling out of the league entirely. Since then, Muhammad has continued to play basketball for a number of foreign leagues and continues to play for a team in Lebanon to this day. Regardless, Muhammad is seen as one of, if not the most disappointing players from the 2013 draft class. But the 2013 draft is interesting because with all this scouting and trying to figure out which players were better than others, they still might go down as one of the most disappointing classes in the history of basketball. In fact, of the 14 lottery picks taken in this draft, only 5 of those players were still with their original team by the time their rookie contract expired. And perhaps even crazier, only one of these picks ever made it to an All-Star team, which I mentioned before was Victor Oladipo, who made it twice and had his career cut short by injuries. But despite this class's shortcomings, there was one player who managed to rise above all expectations, which finally brings us back to this guy. With the 15th pick in the 2013 NBA draft, the Milwaukee Bucks selected Giannis Antetokounmpo.
Giannis Antetokounmpo from Athens, Greece. He last played.
The Greek freak himself, a guy who would go on to change the franchise forever, winning the Bucks their first title in 50 years. But there was still a long road ahead of Giannis before he was going to get there. And trust me when I say this, it was a bumpy one. In his first NBA game ever, Giannis played only 5 minutes, scoring just 1 point. By his 5th game, he had already increased his play to 20 minutes, managing to post his first double-digit scoring effort along with some flashy passes. From there, his rookie season was chock full of ups and downs, some nights showing major promise, and other nights, pure foolishness. And speaking of foolishness, one night before a game in Charlotte, rookie Giannis went to a bank to wire some money to his family back in Greece and accidentally sent them too much, leaving Giannis unable to afford a taxi. Because of this, Giannis was forced to run to the stadium in the freezing cold, eventually bumming a ride off a pair of local Hornets fans headed to the game. The reason I bring this story up is to remind you that Giannis wasn't just new to the NBA as a rookie, but also to all of America. And he was having to deal with the acclamation without his family, leaving Giannis deeply depressed. Just listen to this clip from his brother's podcast about it.
I think the hardest thing was that you guys wasn't here with me, and I was 18. I was a kid. Went to John Hammond's office and just crying like a little kid. I want my mama. I want my mom and dad. You know, dealing with my family stuff and dealing with the terminology, and I wasn't able to pick it up so fast. That was hard.
Somehow, in spite of all his success as a young man, Giannis was still having to fight to help his family survive. But with that goal in mind, Giannis was able to keep himself hungry, leading him to develop an incredible mentality that pushed him farther than anyone could have imagined. During his sophomore season, Giannis doubled his points per game and his assists, leading to head coach Jason Kidd to name Giannis as the Bucks' starting point guard. emphasizing the team's need to run their offense directly through him, even over other players like Jabari Parker, who had just been taken by the team second overall. And Giannis's growth wasn't just happening on the court either. Off the court, Giannis somehow managed to grow 2.5 inches since being taken on draft night, along with adding 26 pounds of muscle to his already impressive frame. With these new measurables, Giannis was beginning to dominate the league, leading him to upping his points average to nearly 23 a game, along with earning himself his first ever All-Star appearance, and winning the league's Most Improved Player award. Now Giannis and the Bucks were ready to set the bar even higher. After finally making the playoffs for the first time in 2017, Giannis was given full reign of the team. That's a lot of a responsibility for a kid who was just 22 years old. As a result, the team struggled to find themselves, ending their next season with a worse record than the year before, prompting the team to fire Jason Kidd and hire head coach Mike Budenholzer, who was a man who had a reputation for turning teams around. This move set Giannis and the Bucks on a path for their first 60-win season, which was enough to end the year as the first-place team in the Eastern Conference, along with earning Giannis another trophy to add to his already impressive collection. Over the next 3 years, Giannis took the crown as the best basketball player in the world, not only winning back-to-back MVPs, but also becoming the first player to win an MVP award and a Defensive Player of the Year in the same year since Hakeem Olajuwon, a feat that has only been accomplished 3 times in NBA history. Now, all that was left for Giannis was to lift the Larry O'Brien Trophy, an achievement Milwaukee hadn't experienced in 50 years. And of course, he reached that goal back in 2021, dropping one of the most insane stat lines in the history of NBA Finals. And what's really crazy is despite all of this success, Giannis's game is still improving to this day. This season alone, Giannis has shown major growth as a mid-range jump shooter, helping him lead the league in field goals and points per game. So how does he keep doing this? How is Giannis always improving? What's the key to his success? Well, here's what Giannis had to say about it.
Ever thought that I'd be sitting in this chair right now and living this dream that I'm living right now. Like all this that I'm going through right now, it's because of what me and my family went through back then.
Giannis Antetokounmpo's most special trait isn't his wingspan or his motor or even his charismatic smile. It's his do-or-die mindset that was instilled in him all the way back in Greece when his life really depended on it. With this trait ingrained into his mentality, Giannis has been able to change his life completely, turning himself into one of the greatest basketball players of all time and helping his family out along the way. So to summarize, Giannis fell in the draft due to his undersized frame and lack of basketball experience. But who could have possibly imagined that a kid from Greece would go on to become a 2-time MVP, an NBA champion, and a role model both on and off the court? Well, maybe Giannis did.
What kind of player will you be in 5 years from now?
I'll be much stronger. I'll be much better in everything.
If you enjoyed these longer videos, please let me know by subscribing and ticking on the notification bell. I have a ton of awesome content coming out and I can't wait to share it with you. Peace.